Good morning, North Queensland teachers. My name is Jen Jones, and Tammy has asked me to make a short little video for you all about the importance of teaching kids to make inferences about vocabulary words while they're reading or while you're reading. And so I want to demonstrate today with this book called Thundercake, which is Patricia Polacco is a wonderful author who uses lots of rich vocabulary words, and I would consider her a mentor author when it comes to teaching complex text or using her books as good examples of complex text. Another good one is William Steig. And Brian Lies also is another good author to use. When we're teaching kids the importance of developing inferences based on words the author chooses to use to explain ideas and get the message across in text. And of course, it doesn't really matter what grade you teach. In fact, I would really encourage a lot of upper grade teachers to use picture books more often because there are a lot of inferences that can be drawn from pictures that are not explicitly stated in the text. And so I shared an example a few weeks ago, and I want to share an example with you today. This would be an activity that you would do with your students either during guided reading. They could certainly do it in their own independent reading once you've modeled it in guided reading or in shared reading. And when I use the term shared reading, you could also, that shared reading is when kids also have their own copy of the book that you're reading or a portion of the book that you're reading. Or this could be part of a read aloud. And when I say read aloud, I mean like more of an interactive read aloud. So whenever I teach kids about picking up on vocabulary words that are in the book, it's going to be really important for you to not just throw out questions to kids like, what does the author mean right there? And just kind of like throw the question out into the wind. It's going to be really important for you to hold all students accountable to answering your questions in the middle of a read aloud or in the middle of a guided reading session right then and there. And the easiest way to do that is by giving all students a whiteboard and a whiteboard marker. When you ask questions to students right in the middle of guided reading or right in the middle of a read aloud, then answering that question is not optional. And unfortunately, too often teachers ask questions of students and don't stop and make sure all kids answer the question. Or what happens a lot of times is teachers ask a question and the way they solicit answers from kids is by kids raising their hands, which a lot of kids think, oh, well, if I don't know the answer, I don't have to raise my hand. And if I don't raise my hand, then I won't get called on. And if I don't get called on, then I won't have to do anything. I won't have to do the work. And that is certainly not the invitation of what questioning means as a teacher. When teachers ask questions in the classroom, they are checking for understanding from everybody. So everybody needs to be able to ask, everybody needs to be under the impression that answering that question is not an invitation. It is, I expect everyone to answer this question right now. But unfortunately, the way classroom design is set up right now and instructional design is that kids do think of questioning as an invitation. So to eliminate that, we're going to get all kids answering the question on a whiteboard. The nice thing about a whiteboard is that it's very temporary. So it's really not like their answers are archived or documented on a worksheet or anything. It really is just giving you a chance to check around the room and seeing, are all kids answering this question? And sending kids a message that, yes, you are expected to answer this question right now. So I have a close reading lesson plan on this book, Thundercake, that I will email the link to Tammy for, which will give you, as a teacher, a good idea of the types of questions that we should be asking our kids during guided reading and shared reading and interactive reading on read alouds that have so many rich questioning opportunities. Okay, as teachers, we often let many instructional and textual opportunities go by when we could be really capitalizing on some of the great teaching points that authors create for us, these opportunities that authors create for us when we're having kids read text for comprehension. So what that requires on your part is to actually have to this is so simple, but sometimes it's so obviously avoided. It's ironic. Before you read a book to your students, before you read it for guided reading and before you read it for a read aloud, it is going to be essential for you to read the book first, okay? And I laugh, and whenever I tell teachers that, they chuckle. And the reason they chuckle is because teachers are guilty of walking over to the classroom library, pick, plucking a book off the shelf and going and sitting down and reading it to the class with no preparation at all. And your kids aren't going to get everything out of the read aloud if you don't sit down and read it first and prepare a few questions that you want to ask them throughout the book that are going to be thought-provoking and get you the most instructional bang for your buck. So really, I'm going to go ahead and on this page right here, on the first page, I'm going to skip this page right here, but let's say you had read this book to your kids and you can stop here. This very first page is a great place for you to stop and ask kids questions about the setting, okay? When you want to ask kids questions about the setting, you want to always begin by, after the very first page, stopping and asking this question. Who is where does the story take place? Okay? Where does the story take place? Because when you stop and ask questions about where the story takes place, you're really getting at the setting, okay? The setting, and it's important for kids to know the kind of the contextual location of the setting so all the other pieces can fall into place. The second question you want to always ask kids after page 1 is who is telling the story. And when you ask kids who is telling the story, you're getting at point of view. And in this story, it says, on sultry summer days at my grandma's farm in Michigan, the air gets damp and heavy, which it also lends to the season or the time of year. Storm clouds drift low over the fields. Birds fly close to the ground. The clouds glow for an instant with a sharp crackling light, and then roaring, low tumbling sound of thunder makes the windows shudder in their panes. Then it goes on to say, the sound used to scare me when I was little. So that leads us to believe that I is telling the story. That's for the kids to determine who I is. So clues for who is telling the story is always found in the pronouns. And then it's got questions here like when I was little. So that's a clue to readers that she is grown up now, but she is telling the story of the time she was scared when she was little. So it goes on to say, I loved, I feared, I used to, I did this, I did that. So the third question you always want to ask kids at the end of page 1 is, what is the mood and tone of the story so far? Okay? Because if your kids know anything about symbolism, they will be able to tell you right away that dark, stormy clouds mean what? Dark, stormy clouds always mean, symbolically, that it's going to be a bad day. It's already starting off to be not a good day. Okay? Rain, storm clouds, gray skies, always. Classic symbolism. If you teach your kids that, they should be able to tell you, Mrs. Jones, that's classic symbolism. We already know it's going to be a bad day. And as the kids read on, they'll go to find out it's going to start off to be a bad day, but it's eventually going to get better. So those are 3 quick kids questions you will always want to ask at the beginning of every story at the end of page 1. Do not go to page 2 until you solidify and shore up their understanding to the answers to those 3 questions. But the point that I want to make with this video with you here today is the importance of us as teachers stopping and checking for understanding about vocabulary words, because there's a lot of inferences. Teachers assume a lot that kids know a lot about vocabulary words in the story, and we assume too much because kids don't always understand what it is we're talking about or what it is the author means. On this page right here, it says, Grandma looked at the horizon, drew a deep breath, and said, this is thunder cake baking weather, all right. Looks like a storm's coming to me. And when you look at the picture, you can see that she's looking off into the horizon. The goats and everything are on the farm there, and we can see the gray clouds and things. And when you ask kids to tell you where the horizon is. And this is another strategy, okay? This is another strategy. I always use a questioning strategy with kids. Instead of getting kids to say the answer out loud, which is not my first choice because kids speak the answer into the wind and then it's gone. My second best way is getting kids to answer on a whiteboard. But the third way to hold kids accountable to answering questions is to use the point to strategy. So you would say to kids, where it says right here, Grandma looked at the horizon, I would say to kids, boys and girls, point in the book to where the horizon is, okay? Use the point to strategy. And when you get that, when you ask kids to point to the answer or point to where the question is solved or point to where the problem gets solved or point to where the illustrator shows us where the horizon is, then again, it's not an invitation. Every single one of your kids at your guided reading table, you are going to be looking around the table, looking for their finger, pointing to the horizon, okay? And you can also have an interactive finger. You can have kids move their finger back and forth across the horizon, which is where the horizon is. But a lot of kids don't know where the horizon is. A lot of kids, and then the next thing you're going to want to do after you ask kids to point to the horizon is you're going to want to say to the kids, now tell me where the horizon is and tell me what a horizon is, okay? And so you want to say to kids, you want to have kids write on their whiteboard, I infer or I think a horizon is the place where the land ends and the sky starts. Something like that. And have kids write their answer on the board. I'm not going to write it right now because I'm going to save this for my next question. So then what you're doing is you're visually scanning around the table for kids to have written an answer very similar to something correctly that it represents a place where where you see the land ending and you see the sky starting. So there's like that imaginary line right there. You will probably need to clarify with kids that it is an imaginary line. It is not an actual line. And if they walked over to that part of the story, if they walked over here, they would not actually see a line. So it's a figurative line, okay? But the thing that I want to talk about here where it says, Grandma looked at the horizon, drew a deep breath, and said, this is thunder, cake, bacon, weather, all right. Looks like a storm is coming to me. And so Grandma knew something here. Grandma knew that the storm was coming, and she knew that it was going to be time to bake a cake because of the weather and everything. And that cake has to do with the entire events of the story. So when we go to this page right here and it says, child, you come out from under that bed. It's only thunder you're hearing, my grandma said. You can see here that the little girl right here is under the bed with only her sneakers sticking out, okay? Now, this is the part where you want to stop and ask kids, why is the little girl under the bed right here, okay? And we can only have kids make inferences that she's under the bed because she's scared of the thunder. But it doesn't actually say that. So we want to make sure kids infer that she's under the bed because she's scared of the thunder, because Grandma says, oh child, you can come out from under that bed. It's only thunder you're hearing. But see, Grandma's trying to minimize the problem, and that's the problem is her whole world right now. So when we get to words, let's ask a question to the kids about a vocabulary word. She says the air was hot, damp, heavy, and damp. A loud clap of thunder shook the house, rattled the windows, and made me grab her close. Steady, child, she cooed. Unless you let go of me, we won't be able to make a thunder cake today. So I would stop right here and I would clarify with kids what the word cooed means. So in this example, I would want children to have read that page and examine how the little girl is feeling, how the grandma is reacting to her fear, looking at that picture, because the inference that kids should be making about what cooed means is going to be in the body language of the characters in this picture right here. So I would stop at that point and I would say to kids that I would want them to write the answer on the board. And this is how the kids are going to do it. They're going to start off by saying, I infer that cooed, and that's, you want them to underline the word they're inferring. I inferred that cooed means that could means said, or she said steady child, or could is another word for said, but it's just saying said in a more comforting way. So I would want children to infer something like, I infer could means said, or the way, or even we can have kids say the soft way. And of course, soft is not a literal soft, but a tone soft. The soft way, grandma held her close, and talked to her or spoke to her, in a comforting way. Okay. And I'm going to say here, it's a special way she talked with her voice. Okay. A warm tone in her voice. Okay. Because could is another way of saying said, but we want kids to know that it's a very soft and special place. And so you are literally scanning around the guided reading table for kids to write this answer out. And it's going to be very important for kids to use the word because and have to tell how kids know. Now, in this example, I did not use the word because I wrote too much, but you would want kids to say, I infer that could means said, because we can say right here, because of, forgot to add that here. I'm not really being a very good role model right now. Because of the soft way grandma held her close and talked to her in a comforting way. I gave all the examples here, but it's going to be important for us to hold kids accountable to using the word because everything that comes after because is their text-based evidence of why they think could means could, why they think the definition of could is what they write. So I want you to try the strategy. Okay, I want you to try the strategy when you're doing guided reading with kids. Give them whiteboards, give them whiteboard pens, and have them stop and answer vocabulary-based questions about inference, because the evidence is going to come straight from the text and the pictures, and this is what Lucy Calkins would call slowing down to speed up. So taking the time to get kids to write this is you're going to get so much more instructional bang for your buck later, because they are going to know that they're going to be held accountable to this. And it's stop and teaching vocabulary words is going to be key for kids to understand tone and mood of the story when it comes later. And of course, giving text-based evidence is a real life skill, preparing them for their future. So with that said, gosh, this video has gone on for 18 minutes, but I hope it helps in some way, and good luck with your reading initiative. I know I'm always happy to help the North Queensland Council for this. So from Raleigh, North Carolina in America, good luck, and hope you all have a wonderful school year.